Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest, I am very excited to introduce him. It's Victor Nunnemaker. Hi, Victor.
Hi, Adi. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Victor, you and I met at one of the Entrepreneurs Organization's events, and we had a conversation about scaling. And you told me your story, and I said, wow, I need to have you on the podcast because I need you to share that story with other entrepreneurs, with our listeners. You know, our listeners basically the profile of our listeners are entrepreneurs that are really motivated to grow and scale. You know, they have successful businesses. They already made it. They're definitely years into the business, but now the dream is to have freedom from the business or to be able to scale so they can exit successfully. They want to maybe build the business to the next level. And you have done all of that. I mean, you're a serial entrepreneur. You did work in the corporate world, right? And you were also able to start businesses from scratch and sell and exit very successfully. Now you're basically, I think you're living the dream. Maybe you have more dreams. I'm sure you do, because it's never just stopping. But, you're very dedicated to your family. You're dedicated to the community and to give back and volunteering. Like you're on the board, you're the president-elect for your own chapter of Entrepreneurs Organization. And, you have a farm. So it's definitely very, very inspiring. And I'd like to ask you questions about how you got there. So that's what we're going to discuss, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Now, add a little bit to the bio. So, what did I miss?
I guess I would start off. I sort of try to live my life. A dear friend of mine from Africa believes there are 4 S's in each of our lives. And that starts off with survival, stability, success. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're arguably already successful. And then the last one, call it service, call it significance, call it whatever you want, but it's sort of the giving back stage. And I'm certainly in that giving back stage, but I started my life. Many are, if you're fortunate to be born in the United States, you don't have to start your life with survival and or stability. I had very tragic upbringing and started my life in probably the very worst possible way, losing my mother at the age of 6 and having to survive my father and his wrath. So for me, and then foster homes and such. So the survival and the stability were really critical parts to my life. But I was very, very fortunate about the age of 15 to sort of get on the track towards success in spite of sort of the impoverished upbringing that I had. We were 10, being raised by my uncle was a mechanic who made $24,000 a year. And so my best friend's dad took me in at the age of 15. I left home, and he started feeding me a little, flyer. Would you like to go and be an exchange student to Germany? And I filled that out, and I went and painted a house for my grandmother, and she bought the plane ticket for me to go to Germany. And I landed, and my host father picked me up in a Mercedes SEL and whisked us off to the French Riviera. And it was like this life that I had never seen or heard. I'd never been on a plane before. I'd never had a steak before. I'd never had so many of life's pleasure, and it kind of opened up this whole can. And so, the first thing I would say is if you don't already have a mentor, you have to. Whether I list Sid Long, who was the counselor, my best friend's dad, who was the counselor of our school, who fed me that application to be an exchange student, and then later helped me to apply for colleges and scholarships and so forth. Or my host father in Germany, who was a businessman and kind of taught me about the business side of life. Or later in life, where I was fortunate to have a couple of very good bosses Eric Keller comes to mind, who, the first company that I took public with him as the vice president of finance was an incredible mentor to me and taught me so much. You have to have a mentor and you have to be a mentor yourself. So both, there's a yin and a yang there, and you have to have both in order to take full advantage. And you may not think that you have much to offer, but you do. There's always someone looking at you thinking, I wish I was you, while you're looking at someone else saying you wish you were them, and somebody who's been in your shoes and trying to do that. And so I was fortunate to get a few of those at a very young age who kind of helped me to get out of the maybe bad habits. And I'm a big, you talk about processes and procedures. You can call them habits, you can call them whatever you want, but there's the book, The Habits. It's called Habits, and it's a great book. And one of the things that brings to mind is the fact that we all have good habits and we all have bad habits. And imagine if once a month, 12 times a year, you could replace one bad habit with one good habit, you would be Elon Musk. Or pick your most famous, successful person you can imagine in your life. You would be that person if you could just get rid of one of your bad habits. And all humans, we all live on habits. We don't brush our teeth every day because we remember to. It's just a habit. And so I tried to use those as hooks to change habits. One of those is, before I drink a cup of coffee, I force myself to have a cup of water just to stay hydrated and so forth. And I was taught some new habits from various different people. I was taught a different way of doing things, and I was fortunate to get some scholarships and go to college. And to your point, I did work in quite a few corporate jobs. I started my career with Pricewaterhouse, probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because I learned how to read financial statements like most people read a book. I learned what all three financial statements are, and then had to go deep into each one of the sections of, there's three sections of each of the three financial statements. And that's one of the things that I impress anytime I'm mentoring someone, sitting on a board, helping someone out, especially young entrepreneurs. The number one single lacking that I find in entrepreneurs' business, they all work hard, they're all smart, they are all trying to find all the hacks. But one of those hacks is just simply learning how to read financial statements and how to analyze them a little bit, and to take the most simple course. And I can tell you, both of my kids are required once a year in college. My daughter's in college, my son will be going to college, to take an accounting class, a finance class, or a business ethics class, because those little things, and I want them all to be entrepreneurs, but so many people just sort of try to outsource that, and they don't try to understand the most basic part of a financial, and that's how they get in trouble. Whether it's whether it's going bankrupt or getting into a cash flow crunch where you run out of cash. You're super profitable, high margins, everything's going great, but you run out of money because you're not paying attention to the cash flow piece of it, and people neglect that quite a bit. So I was very fortunate, whether at Pricewaterhouse and then later at Genentech and Oracle, very large companies with very established processes and procedures, to be a finance guy, a financial analyst is what I did for those companies, and to be able to learn how to read financial statements that later helped me to transition from the various different company segments that I was in. The first company was a high-tech sort of SaaS company before the word SaaS and cloud existed. This was back in 2000. The second company was a biotechnology company. Third company was a construction company. Fourth company was a lumber company. So it doesn't matter, because I can read financials, I can go in and I can see, okay, this is how the business is made up. This is what's going on. These are the assets. This is the profitability. This is whether they're making money or not making money. This is how the cash flow looks. Oh my gosh, we got to get a line of credit or whatever it is to solve those problems. It taught me best practices, so that when I started my own companies from scratch with me, the employee number one, and started bringing people in, I could use that, and I could use those best practices. And I knew the value of processes and procedures. Nobody wants to buy your company if you don't have processes and procedures in place. And I would argue you can't have scale and growth without those processes and procedures in place. You can get your company from 0 to 500,000, maybe by yourself if you're really good. But in order to continue growing and go the next step, 500,000 to 1 million, then 1 million to 5 million, you've got to have processing procedures. Every employee has to emulate you and be you, or at least know this is what I do step by step for that particular process. So does that answer your question a little bit?
It did. Yeah, it's more than answered the question. Definitely the whole story. And I'm sure there's more to the story, but at least, I like the fact that you're saying, the fact that you were financially literate really allowed you, that was the foundation, the common denominator to actually start. It gave you the certainty, right? And the stability and the confidence that you can actually go into any business and figure out how to do it. But, I'm curious about, you were talking about habits. What are some of the other habits that you find that you have that contributed to your success?
I guess I would back up and I would say that so many of us take our adversities in life and we try to squish them down. We try to avoid them. We don't want to talk about them. We want to keep them a secret. And I would argue that almost all of us, and to quote the movie Monsters, Inc., the screams, they harvested the screams. I believe every one of us should harvest the adversities in our life, because really that's what makes us who we are. Very seldom do we learn a lesson when we do something right every single time. We might eventually, but most of the time you do something wrong, you put your finger on a stove and you burn it, you're not going to do that again. You learn a lesson from it. And I think the ability to learn lessons and to fail fast has been something I've had to do over and over again. And the adversities that I had as a young, I was very fortunate as a young child to have many adversities and to have to overcome those and to develop the habits to overcome those. In my family, if you ask my kids what our family motto is, it's Nunnemakers don't give up. Because frankly, if you don't give up, you can't fail. You can't fail unless you've given up on it, because you're continuing to try and you're continuing to try to push forward. So for my success, I like to think I'm a sort of smart guy, but it's much more so the fact that I'm tenacious. Tell me I can't do something and you pretty much guarantee that I will get it done. And I've never been afraid to pursue it and figure out whatever, call it a hack. In Portuguese is jeito, the ability to circumvent, go up, over, around, under, or through a mountain to get to the other side. I'll figure it out. And so I think that's one of the most important attributes that you can figure out how to instill in yourself. And I don't really know how to coach someone on that, except to tell them to focus on it. Don't give up when the going gets tough. Like most people who have been successful, we look at someone like Elon Musk or Warren Buffett or whoever, and we think, oh, overnight success, he just had it all given to me. I mean, I literally had someone the other day tell me, say, oh my God, I never knew that about you. I just assumed you were born to a CEO with money and were born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you've been given everything. And the reality is about as far in the other direction as you can imagine. But
I think, Victor, to that point, I think this is what makes you who you are, right? Because you have to overcome your own obstacles. I mean, if everything was, maybe if you were born to a CEO and was just giving everything, then you might not have chosen that path because you didn't have those obstacles to overcome, and you would just take it for granted. So we can also argue on that end.
I absolutely agree with you. I don't think that I would be who. And when I sit around a room and listen to entrepreneurs talk about what they've been through, I realize that the most of them in the room have been through some incredible adversity that they've had to overcome and that they've had to push through to get to the other side. And so, embrace those adversities. I have not gotten to where I am without having to go through a 9-month grueling Department of Justice investigation for antitrust and monopoly and blah, 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 which I came through squeaky clean. You name it, I've been through it. I've had employees steal everything, my IP and actual equipment, and go and start a competing company and have to go through the courts with that. I've had to deal with shady competitors. I've had to deal with, you name it, I've gone through it, and it's just another day, right? That's if you think everything running a business is going to go smoothly, I love the little graph where everyone thinks that this is the way to success, and the way to success is actually like this. And all over the place, but hopefully up and to the right. But
that's right. So long as it's uptrending, that's what you want to do. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Wow. Good. So now we have, if we have a listener, a listener right now that's thinking, wow, okay, Victor, you went through your obstacles. Thank you for sharing the story. It's very obvious that you walk the walk and you overcome and you persist and you're tenacious. And your intelligence and your education and the ability to actually understand the finance of the business got you helped you tremendously. What other advice would you give them in terms of being able to start companies from scratch and actually be able to successfully exit them? What are the key components that they need to do or take into account or be aware of in order to do that?
The first one is every marathon starts with a first step. Figure out what that first step is and take it. Like now, today, in 5 minutes, when you get off of this podcast, go on Amazon and order little stencils to paint the little numbers on the side of the street and go knock on a neighbor's door. That takes 5 minutes of your time, but until you do the first one, until you start to learn how to fail, you won't make it. And so many people have great ideas, and ideas are worth nothing, zero, unless you have the ability to execute them. And executing them starts with a single step. There is not probably a single thing I would have done. It was all blissful ignorance. Had I known what I was getting into in advance, I wouldn't have started it. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is start processes and procedures from the beginning. Start to write down what it takes to be successful and keep a journal. I mean, I wake up every morning and I write for about 10 or 15 minutes, just various different things. I try to keep it optimistic and positive. And then later throughout the day, I keep a journal. This worked, this didn't work. This is a different path that I can do. But start the process and procedures. And then later, when your company gets to a certain size, what I did in 2 of my companies, I literally hired a kid fresh out of Berkeley to come in and meet with every person, all the main departments of my company, and draft up processes and procedures for each of those different departments so that I could hand it to the next guy who was going to manage that department if one of my guys walked out, and say, do this, number one. And number two, because I knew that I had that end goal, and that would be another piece of advice. Have an end goal. What is your exit strategy? What is it you're trying to accomplish with the business? Is it a lifestyle business? If so, great. Decide that up front. Have fun with it, and don't let it take over having a life outside of the business. If it is to build a business and sell it, great. Have that in mind so that everything you can. I tell my kids often, you can run 100 miles an hour, but if you're running in the wrong direction, you're never going to get there. So make sure you at least have a goal. You have a star that you're aligning by, that you're trying to get to. If it's to try to sell your business, you're going to need processes and procedures to be able to hand that off to the new buyer. You're going to need key employees who understand and are willing to go with the company in order to hand that over. Otherwise, I mean, obviously it depends on the type of business that you have, and there's all kinds of nuances we can get into. But in general, they want to know that you have a business that is autonomous. Unless you want to sell yourself and go and work in that business for the next 5 years, which I was never interested in doing. The day I sold my business, I was done with my business. I consulted for them, went to their board meetings. I committed to that for 2 years, and I was on call, but I didn't have a 40-hour or 80-hour or whatever week. I didn't have to go into the office anymore. I was done. And that was great. So have an exit strategy if that's what you want to do. If the exit strategy is an IPO, be prepared for a long and grueling S1 and drafting and all that stuff that you have to go through. And it is grueling, but like, I wouldn't trade that adversity, those all-nighters at Wilson Sonsini at the legal firm drafting up the S1. I wouldn't trade it for anything. That adversity, that taught me so much. And I learned that, I joke to my kids all the time, I've done so much with so little for so long, I can now do anything with nothing, because I believe that about myself. I know, I know from my childhood that the rest is a piece of cake, that I will be successful. And then I think you asked about habits, and I think there are certain habits in your life that everyone needs to adopt in order to be successful, not just in a business, but in life, with family, as a leader, which we are leaders and people look up to us. And those habits include, moderation of certain things like alcohol. I like to have a glass of wine, but I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times I've been drunk in my entire, 50 plus years on this planet. And, because I know that it doesn't do me any good, and that I'm not as sharp the next day, and I'm not a good leader, and I'm not a good role model for others around me.
You're not setting a good example. I agree.
You're not. And I was also fortunate or unfortunate to have quite a few siblings die of drugs or alcohol and various alcohol related accidents growing up. I mean, I had a sister, high on whatever and drunk, put her daughter in a car and head on collision, when I was a kid. My little brother was killed in an automobile accident head on with a tree that my other sister was driving. I had a sister who was a lifelong meth addict, and it's you watch that and you realize, do I want that life? Or do I need to get out of here at the age of 15 and leave home? And yes, I was 15, but that's what you got to do. We are a product of the 5 people we spend the most amount of time with. And if you're spending time with a bank robber, a rapist, a drug addict, or somebody who lacks ethics and morals, you're probably going to eventually, if not end up going down that road yourself, be affected by it because you happen to be in the car when the bank was robbed, whatever. And so you have to be aware of the people around you and surround yourself by people that you want to spend time with, people who you admire and respect, and who can be a mentor to you, and people who you want to mentor. So I think those are really critical. I am a huge proponent of I keep myself physically fit all the time. I run or lift or cycle or do something every single day. I pay attention to what goes in my body as far as nutrition, and just because it helps me to be fit, it helps me to set a good example for whoever it is who's following me, who maybe it's an employee in a company or my own kids. And I don't just do it for my physical fitness. That's probably 15% of it. The other 85% of it, or 185% of it, if you want to not do math right, is this. When I have a problem, I go for a run. I'll jump on a bike, and you know what? An hour or two into that run or bike, the problem will have been solved. For the mental acuity, the emotional support, the endorphins and that it releases, it's huge. And so having certain habits, I think are absolutely in your daily life. Wake up, have a glass of water before you drink your dehydrating coffee. Don't drink a ton of alcohol. Eat well, but don't eat too much. Eat real foods. There are not that many that you have to adopt. Back to the beginning of our talk, and not that many that you have to give up to actually lead a pretty incredible life. And right. I've led a pretty fortunate and incredible life since I was able to realize that and get out. So.
Yeah. And when I'm listening to you, I think a common denominator of all of that is also being intentional. You're very intentional about what you do, right? You don't just Absolutely. Do this or do that. You go no, if I do this, you look at the consequences, which are really if I'm going to drink too much, those are the consequences. If I'm going to put this thing in my body, those are the consequences. Not just the consequences on your health, but the consequences of not being as sharp, not being able to, if you need to work long hours, I won't be able to do that. I won't be able to exercise. I won't be here. I won't be there. So it's really the combination of looking at the consequences and being intentional about what you do.
Absolutely.
And being tenacious and not giving up. That's amazing. That's a great combination. And I think it's a recipe for success.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, Adi, because the reality is what I said earlier about journaling. Everyone thinks being intentional requires 24/7. I have to be intentional. I have to be intentional. I have to be intentional. It doesn't. You can do it in 5 minutes a day, in the morning, before you get your coffee, before you click on your phone. I never turn on my phone until I've journaled. What am I going to accomplish today? What am I going to get done today? What is the most important thing? Why am I here today? And then what are some things that I'm grateful for? Because expressing gratitude makes all of us realize nobody is going to, you don't sit down and write down in your journal, yeah, today my purpose is to get drunk, and I hope to drink as many drinks as I can. I hope not to exercise, and I hope not. If you sat down and said, hey, my purpose today is to be a good leader and to take my company to the next level. Write that down 5 or 6 days in a row, and then start writing down some of the things that first step that you might need to do to take it to that next level. And you'd be surprised that you'll find yourself doing those things during the day by taking 5 minutes to set your intentionality at the beginning of the day before you rush off in the wrong direction at 100 miles an hour going backwards.
I love it. It's such a simple habit, but so powerful. Yeah. And I agree. I also start my day that way, just really deciding what's going to happen that way before you get into anything else. And I also like to read an inspirational quote and think about how I'm going to apply that. Then I have my exercise routine. And, and I actually interviewed many entrepreneurs. One of them that I'm thinking about is Odette, which I also, she's also in the Entrepreneurs Organization from Seattle. And she has a great business of creating this beautiful artistic cakes. And I will include the episode I did with her in the show notes. And she also talked about her routine and what she does and how important it is in order for her to be so successful. And I can give many more examples, but I think it's a key thing to develop your own habits with looking at the intention and the consequence of why you're doing it. I definitely agree 100%.
Yeah, I there's a book called Tools of Titan, Tim Ferriss. If you haven't read it, it's a great book with he interviewed a couple thousand people, and then he took the best of the best and he separated out into healthy, wealthy, and wise. Ben Franklin's Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. So healthy people, coaches of Olympic athletes, wealthy, the billionaires of the world, and the wise. And each chapter is only 3 pages. But what he does, which is really cool, is he goes through all of them and he figures out, okay, he synthesizes and says, okay, what are the habits of the most successful people in the world that span all of them? And I always ask people, what's the most followed habit that everybody does? And people pick a bunch of different things, but it's about 75% of people who are really successful have some sort of meditation. And you can call meditation prayer, you can call it meditation, just being silent and going inward. You can call it various different things, but meditation is the most common thing that all of these successful people have. And some of the other things included, drinking water on a daily basis. I mean, I've already done that because I've always been an athlete and I wake up parched and so forth. But each of those, I highly recommend the book. It's great. You just learn what other leaders of the world have done. And
I love
what
that. I love learning from
are.
others. And I think it's important. Yeah. That's another habit, is like learn from others that are successful, what they've done. Apply for yourself. Absolutely. What applies for you. I mean, you definitely take what applies for you, because, they might be doing other things that, don't align with who you are. But I think you can always get good ideas and you can always learn new things. And that's another thing, right, Victor, is like, be willing to learn new things.
Absolutely. Be curious about everything. I have thought 5 times on this talk alone that I'm talking way too much, but you are interviewing me. So that's my job on this call. But normally I would be the one, people call me machine gun question. I ask questions because I want to hear about other people. I like doing what you're doing right now. And I like to learn. And I'm always curious in whatever situation I find myself, because I truly do believe I can learn something from every single person out there, whether drug addict, homeless person, or successful business person or president of the United States. Everybody has something to teach.
I agree. It's being interested and being curious is like such an important attribute for sure. And before we end this podcast, I have to give a shout out to John Corcoran, who is a good friend of both of us. And yes. He's the co-founder of Rise 25, and they produce this podcast. But it's definitely, I want to give him a shout out, because as you were mentioning, in terms of asking good questions and being curious and being always, why is that? He's a great interviewer as well, and wanted to mention here and give him a shout out for helping me. I know him, he interviewed you. So definitely thank you, John, for being so awesome.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Not a more giving person out there. He's a self-admitted recovering attorney who started his own very successful company as an entrepreneur, and I call him a good friend, and he's on the board with me here in the San Francisco chapter, and he's been fantastic, and I think he'll be up in Seattle as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's right, absolutely. Well, Victor, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. I mean, the information that you just gave us is so valuable. We're going to also write a blog post about it so people can actually see the different points. And you're a true mentor. I can see that you like to share that knowledge with others and make sure that they are successful as well. Because honestly, I think, if we're going to have people around us that are successful, we're going to be even more successful.
Absolutely. I just leave it at embrace your adversities, learn to read financial statements, and take the first step, guys. I mean, if you can do it. If I can do it, anyone can do this.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.